The illusion of the self and free will. Have you ever wondered who you really are? About the meaning of the small pronoun I, which we use all the time. The self, or I, seems like the most intimate and real thing we possess. And yet neuroscience and philosophy suggests something unsettling. The self might be nothing more than an illusion. Think about it. The brain continuously integrates billions of signals. What we see, what we touch, the position of the body in space, the emotions we feel. All of this is unified into a coherent experience of identity. But it's a construction. Experiments like the famous rubber hand illusion show us how fragile this sense of self really is. A simple sensory trick enough to convince the brain that a fake hand belongs to our body. And further, in dissociative disorders or under the influence of psychedelic substances, the self can fragment, dissolve, radically change. This indicates that this is not a fixed entity, but a dynamic process. Philosophy had intuited this long before. David Hume described the self as nothing more than a bundle of perception without any permanent core. Derek Parfit explained that personal identity is not some further effect, but only a wave of memories and psychological continuities. And Thomas Metzinger, one of today's leading philosophers of mind, argues that what we call the self is nothing but a transparent neural model, an internal simulation the brain constructs, which we mistake for reality. And so the inevitable question arises, if the self is an illusion, what becomes of free will? Are we truly the ones making choices? In the 80s, Benjamin Libet demonstrated something deeply disturbing. When we decide to move a hand, the brain has already begun preparing the movement hundreds of milliseconds before we become aware of it. And more recent studies have pushed this discovery even further. With neuroimaging techniques, it is possible to predict our decisions up to 10 milliseconds before they reach consciousness. And this suggests that the sensation of freely choosing is maybe nothing more than a story our mind tells itself afterwards. A narrative that makes us believe we are conscious agents, when in fact the decision-making processes have already begun elsewhere, in the unconscious or in System 1, you name it. So then, why do we possess these illusions? Why would the brain invent a self and a free will if they are not real? The answer is probably evolutionary. The self is a narrative glue. It allows us to integrate experiences, give ourselves coherence over time, to present ourselves to others as stable and recognizable individuals. Free will, instead, is the foundation of responsibility. If we did not believe we could choose, how could we live together, organize societies, attribute merit and blame? In other words, these illusions are not errors, they are tools. Functional fictions that the mind has built in order to increase our chances of survival, cooperation, and success. And so we arrive at a fascinating paradox. The self and the freedom may not exist as metaphysical entities, but they exist as operative experiences. They are true in a pragmatic sense because they guide our lives, even if they are not true in an ontological one. Perhaps, in the end, the illusion of the self is the greatest invention of the brain, an inner theater where the characters are ourselves, a necessary illusion, one that allows us to live, to act, to love. And the real question is not whether the self is real or illusory, but whether we could live without this marvelous illusion